I'd been documenting Chicago's abandoned buildings for 5 years, and my Instagram followers knew exactly what they were getting from my account. Clean architectural shots, historical context in the captions, maybe some commentary about urban decay or preservation efforts. No clickbait titles about haunted locations, no dramatic music over shaky camera footage, and definitely no claims about supernatural encounters. That garbage was for teenagers trying to go viral, not serious urban explorers. My phone buzzed with a direct message notification while I sat at my kitchen table, editing photos from last weekend's trip to an old factory on the west side. The username looked familiar: Greg Martinez, another Chicago explorer I'd crossed paths with in online forums. We'd never met in person, but I recognized his work. Solid documentation, good research, no theatrical nonsense. His message was short. "Mike, you need to see this. Happened 2 days ago at Woodlawn Elementary. I'm not making this up." Below the text sat a video file attachment, 23 minutes long. I clicked play, expecting another exploration walkthrough. Greg's voice came through my laptop speakers, explaining his approach to the building. Standard stuff. He'd done his homework on the location. Woodlawn Elementary had closed in 2019 due to budget cuts, leaving a 3-story brick building to slowly deteriorate on the south side. The city had boarded up most access points, but Greg had found a way in through a basement window. The first 15 minutes played out exactly like every other exploration video I'd watched. Empty hallways, overturned desks, graffiti tags, broken glass crunching under his feet. Greg narrated as he moved through classrooms, pointing out architectural details and making observations about the building's condition. His voice stayed calm and measured, the way mine sounded in my own recordings. Then everything changed. Greg had been checking out what looked like the main hallway on the second floor when he stopped talking mid-sentence. The camera went still, and I could hear his breathing shift, slower, more controlled, like he was trying to stay quiet. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened except the ambient sound of wind moving through broken windows. Then I heard it too. A woman's voice, distant but clear, singing something I couldn't quite make out. The melody wandered up and down without any obvious pattern, almost like a nursery rhyme someone had forgotten half the words to. Greg whispered into his camera, "Do you guys hear that?" His voice had completely changed, tight with nerves I'd never heard from him before. The singing got louder. Not closer exactly, but more distinct, like someone had turned up the volume. I caught fragments of what sounded like a name being repeated. Tommy, maybe, or Timmy, woven into the wordless melody. Greg started backing toward what looked like a classroom doorway, his camera work getting shakier. Through the viewfinder, I watched him duck inside an old kindergarten room and position himself behind a cluster of tiny plastic chairs. The singing continued in the hallway outside, and now I could hear footsteps too. Bare feet on linoleum, slow and deliberate. "Tommy, where are you, Tommy?" The voice was clearer now, sweet and patient like a mother calling her child for dinner. Come out, Tommy." Greg's breathing was quick and shallow. The camera shook in his hands as the footsteps passed right outside the classroom door. I saw some red fabric move past the door frame, a dress or skirt, flowing as someone walked by. The woman kept calling the name, her voice moving back and forth in the hallway like she was pacing. Sometimes she'd stop and the building would go quiet except for Greg's panicked breathing. Then she'd start again, always returning to that sing-song call. "Tommy, Tommy, where did you go?" This went on for maybe 5 minutes. Greg stayed completely still behind those little chairs, and I caught myself holding my breath even though I was watching from my kitchen table. The woman's voice had something wrong with it. Too cheerful, too patient, like someone playing a kid's game that stopped being fun hours ago. Finally, the singing and footsteps moved away, getting quieter as they headed toward what must have been the far end of the hallway. Greg waited another full minute before he whispered, "I'm getting out of here." The rest of the video showed his escape route, sneaking back toward the basement window, moving as quietly as possible, constantly looking over his shoulder. Just before he reached the exit, he turned the camera toward the second floor and I saw her clearly for the first time. A woman in a red dress standing at the broken window at the end of the hallway, looking down at him. She wasn't calling anymore, just watching. Greg crawled through the basement window and ran across the weedy playground toward the fence line. When he looked back one more time, the woman was at the school's front entrance, still wearing that red dress, still watching him leave. The video ended with Greg out of breath in his car, his face red and sweaty in the phone's front-facing camera. "I don't know what that was," he said, "but I'm never going back there." I watched the whole thing again right away, then a third time. 5 years of urban exploration had taught me how to spot the fakes. Bad audio mixing where ghostly voices got added in later. Convenient camera glitches right before the supernatural encounter. Friends playing pranks just outside the camera's view. Greg's video had none of those signs. His fear looked real. The audio was consistent throughout, and the woman appeared too briefly and from too far away for fancy staging. The timestamp in the corner read, 2 days ago, 3:47 p.m. Woodlawn Elementary School, just like Greg had said. I closed my laptop and sat back in my kitchen chair, thinking about what I'd just seen. For 5 years, I'd been dismissing this kind of content as fake drama. Every urban explorer had stories about strange encounters, and I'd always had logical explanations ready. Homeless people looking for shelter, other explorers messing around, weird sounds from old building acoustics. But Greg wasn't some rookie trying to get famous online. His other videos showed the same careful approach I used, the same respect for the places and their history. He'd never posted anything supernatural before, never tried to create fake scares for views. And that woman's voice, I couldn't get it out of my head. The way she'd called that name over and over, patient and sweet and totally wrong for an abandoned building in the middle of the afternoon. I opened my laptop again and started researching Woodlawn Elementary School. I woke up with my laptop still open on the kitchen table, the screen displaying a Google search for Woodlawn Elementary School, Chicago. The coffee I'd made while watching Greg's video had gone cold, a brown ring staining the bottom of the mug. My neck ached from falling asleep in the chair, but my mind was already racing with questions I needed answered. The school's official closure had been covered extensively by local news outlets. Budget cuts forced the Chicago public school system to consolidate several underperforming elementary schools in 2019, leaving Woodlawn empty, along with dozens of other buildings across the city. The articles painted a familiar picture, another piece of Chicago's educational infrastructure abandoned to decay while administrators shuffled resources elsewhere. What caught my attention were the follow-up stories from neighborhood blogs and community forums. Residents had complained about break-ins and vandalism within months of the closure. Someone had set small fires in several classrooms during the winter of 2020. Drug paraphernalia turned up regularly in the playground area. The usual progression for any abandoned building in an economically struggling neighborhood. I pulled up Google Street View and typed in the address Greg had mentioned in his video. The 3-story brick structure looked exactly like the building I'd seen in his footage. Same broken windows, same graffiti tags across the exterior walls, same chain-link fence with obvious gaps cut through the metal. I rotated the view to check all angles, identifying the basement window Greg had used for entry on the building's east side. Cross-referencing his video with the street view images confirmed everything. The timestamp, the approach route, even the specific section of fence he'd climbed through. Greg hadn't fabricated the location or staged his entry point. The red dress detail still felt unusual, but people experiencing psychological breaks often fixated on specific clothing or objects. I'd encountered similar situations during previous explorations. A man in an old factory who insisted on wearing a construction helmet everywhere, a woman in a defunct shopping mall who carried 3 different purses simultaneously. The singing and calling could be symptoms of auditory hallucinations or simply someone talking to themselves. The patient, repetitive nature of it actually fit with certain mental health conditions I'd read about online. My rational mind had built a complete framework for everything Greg had experienced. Someone was living in Woodlawn Elementary, probably a woman dealing with psychological issues, and she'd worn a red dress that day for whatever personal reasons drove her choices. Greg had stumbled into her space and witnessed behavior that seemed supernatural only because he lacked context. Something made me want to see the place myself. Maybe professional curiosity, maybe the need to prove my theory correct. I'd been documenting abandoned Chicago buildings for 5 years, and this would be just another location with another story of urban decay and human displacement. I decided to visit during afternoon hours when visibility would be optimal and any potential occupants might be away from the building. Safety protocols demanded careful preparation, so I gathered my standard exploration kit from the closet. Heavy-duty LED flashlight with enough lumens to illuminate large spaces, backup batteries in waterproof cases, 2 protein bars, and a full water bottle in case the exploration took longer than expected. Basic first aid supplies including bandages, antiseptic wipes, and pain medication. My phone with a portable battery pack to ensure communication capability throughout the visit. I also grabbed my backup camera, a compact digital model I used for documentation when my phone wasn't sufficient. If I encountered anything worth recording, I wanted reliable equipment. Before leaving my apartment, I sent a text message to David. Exploring Woodlawn Elementary on South Side today. Should be back by 6 p.m. Call police if you don't hear from me. David had gotten used to these safety check-ins over the years, though he still worried about my hobby. At least this way, someone would know where to look if something went wrong. The drive south took me through neighborhoods I rarely visited, past blocks of houses with boarded windows and empty lots, where buildings had been demolished years ago. Traffic moved slowly through construction zones and around double-parked cars, stretching what should have been a 30-minute trip into 40 minutes of stop-and-go progress. When I finally reached the address, I parked across the street from Woodlawn Elementary and got my first real look at the building that had featured in Greg's unsettling video. I sat in my car for several minutes, looking at the building that had bothered Greg enough to share that video. The 3-story brick building looked way worse than the research photos showed. Every floor had multiple broken windows, some with jagged glass still hanging in the frames, others completely empty. Graffiti covered the walls in layers, gang tags, random scrawls, and what looked like political statements spray-painted over each other until you could barely see the original brick color. The chain-link fence around the property showed signs of frequent trespassing. I counted at least 4 obvious gaps where people had cut through the metal, leaving bent sections that could be pulled aside easily. One opening near the main entrance was large enough to drive a motorcycle through. The city had made a token effort to secure the building, but they'd given up maintaining it long ago. Getting out of my car, I pulled my backpack over my shoulders and checked that my phone was recording my location. The safety protocol felt more important here than at most places I'd explored. Something about how remote the building was and the obvious signs of regular activity made me more careful than usual. I walked along the fence, looking for the best way in. Greg had used a basement window on the east side, but I wanted to avoid following his exact route. On the building's west side, I found what I needed, a ground floor window where the entire frame had been removed, leaving a rectangular opening that looked like a doorway. No climbing required, no broken glass to deal with, Someone had even placed a concrete block beneath the opening to make entry easier. The smell hit me before I'd fully stepped inside. Mold, decay, and something else I couldn't identify but didn't want to think about too hard. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it across what had once been a first-grade classroom. Tiny desks were overturned and scattered across the floor, their metal legs twisted at odd angles. Papers littered the ground, bleached white by years of sunlight coming through broken windows. An alphabet poster hung from one corner, the rest torn away and crumpled in the corner. I started my methodical documentation, moving from room to room along the first-floor hallway. Each classroom showed the same signs of abandonment and neglect. Broken glass crunched under my boots, beer bottles mostly, along with scattered drug paraphernalia that showed this place had regular visitors. Needle caps, burnt spoons, small plastic bags that had once held substances I didn't want to handle even accidentally. The hallways were worse than the classrooms. Someone had kicked holes in several walls, showing the wooden frame beneath the plaster. Water damage had left dark stains across the ceiling tiles, and in some areas, the tiles had fallen completely, revealing pipes and electrical conduits above. My footsteps sounded different in each section as I moved deeper into the building. In what had been the cafeteria, I found evidence of small fires. Charred circles on the linoleum where people had burned debris for warmth, with smoke stains going up the walls. Empty food cans were scattered around the burn marks, along with more bottles and the inevitable drug supplies. The commercial kitchen area was stripped bare. Anything valuable had been removed years ago. When I reached the library, I expected to find more of the same destruction. Instead, I stopped in the doorway, surprised by what my flashlight showed. Someone had set up a neat living area here, not the chaotic mess I'd seen in other abandoned buildings. Blankets were folded neatly in one corner, making a makeshift bed that looked deliberately arranged. Empty food containers sat in a precise line along the wall. Soup cans, cereal boxes, water bottles, all clean and organized. The floor around the sleeping area had been swept clear of debris. Against the far wall, someone had stacked children's books with careful attention to size and order. Picture books on the bottom, chapter books on top, all spine out like a real library display. The books themselves looked worn but clean, as if someone had been reading them regularly. What caught my attention most was the doll propped against the book stack. Blonde hair hung in tangled knots around a plastic face with bright blue eyes, but the doll's blue dress was surprisingly clean. No stains, no tears except for a small rip near the hem that looked accidental. Someone had positioned the doll carefully, leaning it against the books at just the right angle to look comfortable. I took several photos of the setup, trying to capture the strange contrast between the building's overall decay and this pocket of organization. The arrangement felt intentional, almost like someone really cared about how things were placed. This wasn't typical homeless living, where people grabbed whatever shelter they could find and left a mess behind. Someone was living here long-term and had made their own little home. Moving closer to look at the books, I noticed they were all elementary-level reading. No adult novels or magazines, just children's stories about talking animals and fairy tale adventures. Several looked like they might have been left behind when the school closed, but others were in too good condition to have sat here for 3 years. Someone had been collecting them. The food containers told a similar story. The labels showed purchase dates within the last few months, and the variety suggested regular shopping trips rather than scavenging. Soup, crackers, canned fruit, granola bars, all things that could be eaten without cooking, but provided decent nutrition. Whoever was living here had resources and planning skills. I checked the rest of the library carefully, looking for more personal items that might tell me about the person. In a supply closet that still had a working door, I found more signs of someone living here long-term. A small mirror propped on a shelf next to basic toiletries, toothbrush, soap, shampoo bottles that looked recently used, clean towels folded and stacked beside a plastic basin that could be used for washing. Everything pointed toward a single person who'd been here for months, possibly longer. Someone who valued cleanliness and organization, who read children's books and took care of a doll. This didn't match what I expected from the typical homeless people that used abandoned buildings for shelter. Standing in that library, surrounded by the careful arrangements and clean belongings, I started to reconsider my logical explanation for Greg's experience. The woman he'd met might not have been a random person with mental health issues. She might have been someone who'd made this place into her home, someone who had reasons for being here beyond simply needing shelter. The children's books and the doll suggested something else entirely, something that made me less comfortable about continuing my exploration alone. I left the library with more questions than answers, but my curiosity was stronger than my growing worry. The main stairwell creaked as I climbed to the second floor. Each step made noise through the empty building, and I started moving more carefully to keep quiet. The damage up here was worse than what I'd seen below. Big sections of hallway ceiling had fallen down, leaving chunks of plaster and twisted metal all over the floor. Water stains covered the walls in dark patterns from multiple roof leaks over the years. The first classroom I entered looked like someone had trashed it on purpose. Desks were piled in the center of the room, and partly burned, leaving charred wood and melted plastic stuck together in a blackened heap. The walls around the fire showed heat damage, with paint bubbled and peeling in wide circles. Whoever had done this didn't care about airflow. Smoke stains went all the way to the ceiling above the burn site. I went through 3 more classrooms and found similar signs of recent fires. Not the careful, contained burns I'd seen in the cafeteria downstairs, but careless destruction that could have easily spread through the entire building. The smell of burned plastic hung in the air, mixed with something chemical that made my eyes water. These fires hadn't happened years ago when the building was first abandoned. The debris patterns and ash suggested much more recent activity. I took out my camera and documented each burn site carefully. The pattern didn't make sense if I assumed one person was living here. The library showed careful organization and long-term planning. But these classrooms showed destructive behavior that didn't match that level of control. Either multiple people were using this building, or the single person had very different states of mind at different times. As I knelt to take pictures of the ash patterns in the 4th classroom, something caught my attention in the dust near the doorway. Footprints, clearly defined and recent enough that they hadn't been disturbed by wind or falling debris. Small prints, narrow and completely bare, without any sign of shoes or socks. The toe marks were clear, and the distance between steps suggested someone much shorter than average adult height. I followed the prints with my flashlight beam, tracing their path from the classroom door toward the main hallway. They moved in a straight line, not the wandering pattern I'd expect from someone exploring randomly. These prints had purpose, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. The prints matched the detail from Greg's video that had bothered me most, the sound of bare feet on linoleum that he'd recorded so clearly. Someone had been walking these halls without shoes, and recently enough that their tracks were still visible in the dust and debris. I stood up slowly, suddenly aware that the building felt less empty than when I'd entered. The organized living space, the recent burns, and now fresh footprints showed someone was still using this place, making my presence here feel like I was trespassing in someone's actual home. From somewhere deeper in the building came a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I held my breath and turned my head toward the noise, trying to figure out where it came from. The sound lasted only a few seconds before stopping completely, leaving me wondering if I'd actually heard anything at all. I waited, standing completely still in the doorway of the burned classroom. My own breathing seemed loud in the silence, and I became aware of every small movement I made. The rustle of my jacket, the slight creak of floorboards under my feet, even the quiet buzz of my flashlight. But whatever had made the scraping sound didn't happen again. After a full minute of listening, I told myself it was just the wind pushing debris around somewhere else in the building. Old buildings make constant noise as they settle and move, especially buildings with this much damage. I'd heard similar sounds in dozens of other abandoned places without finding any people causing them. Moving toward the administrative offices at the far end of the hallway, I followed the bare footprints as they led me deeper into the building. The principal's office door hung open, showing another space that had been completely trashed. File cabinets were knocked over and their contents scattered across the floor, creating a carpet of water-damaged papers and folders. Someone had used spray paint to cover every wall with overlapping tags and messages, most of them unreadable because of the multiple layers. But the main office area behind the reception desk showed signs of the same careful organization I'd found in the library. A supply closet with a working door had been turned into storage space for personal belongings. Women's clothing was folded and stacked on makeshift shelves created from flipped milk crates, jeans, sweaters, blouses, all clean and arranged by type and color. The selection suggested someone who could go shopping regularly, not the random mix of donated or scavenged items I'd expect from typical homeless people. On the windowsill facing the playground, toiletries were arranged in a neat line, shampoo and conditioner bottles both nearly full. A bar of soap in a plastic container, a toothbrush standing up in a coffee mug next to a tube of toothpaste, deodorant, lotion, even a small bottle of perfume that looked recently bought. Everything suggested someone who kept up regular hygiene routines and cared about how they looked. Food wrappers in a small trash bag provided more evidence of recent occupation. Granola bar packages with expiration dates still months away. Empty soup cans that showed no rust. Plastic containers that had held fresh fruit, based on the product labels still stuck to the sides. This wasn't survival eating. Someone was maintaining a varied diet with food that required regular shopping trips. I took pictures of each discovery, building a visual record of what looked like a functioning living situation hidden within an abandoned building. The contrast between the building's obvious decay and these pockets of careful maintenance created an increasingly complex picture of whoever called this place home. As I adjusted my camera settings to capture the toiletry arrangement more clearly, I heard distinct footsteps from somewhere below me. Not the random settling sounds I'd been hearing throughout my exploration, but the unmistakable rhythm of human movement. Slow, deliberate steps against linoleum flooring, moving with purpose rather than wandering. I froze completely, listening. The footsteps continued at a steady pace, suggesting someone who wasn't trying to hide but also wasn't hurrying. The sound carried clearly through the building's damaged structure, allowing me to track the movement as it progressed through the first floor. The steps paused directly below my position in the administrative office area. Complete silence stretched for what felt like several minutes, though it was probably only 30 seconds. Then the footsteps started again, but now they were moving in a different direction, toward the main stairwell I'd used to reach the second floor. Someone was coming upstairs. I quickly thought through my options as I realized the person below was heading toward the same stairwell that was my main way out. I needed to find another way off this floor, and I needed to do it without making noise that would give away where I was. Moving as quietly as possible, I stepped carefully around the scattered office junk and headed toward the opposite end of the hallway. Emergency exit signs were still visible on some walls, though most were cracked or partly covered by graffiti. If this building followed standard school design, There should be a second stairwell near the far end that would let me reach the first floor without running into whoever was climbing the main stairs. As I passed one of the broken windows overlooking the playground, movement below caught my attention. I positioned myself to look down without being seen against the window frame, using the jagged glass pieces as cover. A figure in red fabric was moving through the first-floor hallway directly beneath me. The color matched exactly what Greg had described in his video: bright red, flowing like a dress or long skirt. From this angle, I couldn't make out details about the person wearing it, but the fabric's movement confirmed someone was definitely inside the building and moving like they knew their way around the damaged hallways. The footsteps I'd been hearing suddenly made perfect sense. This was the building's occupant, the person who'd created those careful living spaces and left the fresh footprints in the dust. Greg's supernatural encounter had a completely normal explanation. He'd stumbled into someone's home and seen behavior that seemed strange, only because he didn't understand the situation. But knowing what was happening didn't make me feel any safer about being trapped on the second floor, while that person climbed toward where I was. The emergency exit sign at the far end of the hallway was barely readable through layers of spray paint, but I could make out the arrow pointing toward what should be a secondary stairwell. I walked as quietly as possible along the damaged corridor, stepping carefully around fallen ceiling tiles and broken glass that could announce my presence with a single wrong step. Behind me, the footsteps had reached the second-floor landing. The measured pace continued, but now a soft noise accompanied the movement, a woman's voice carrying a melody I couldn't recognize. The tune had no pattern, rising and falling like someone singing to themselves while doing everyday tasks. It should have been normal, but something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. I pressed myself against the wall and looked back toward the main stairwell. The red fabric was visible now, moving slowly along the hallway in my direction. Whoever was wearing it seemed in no hurry, stopping occasionally at classroom doorways as if checking on spaces they knew. The noise never stopped, keeping its wandering melody that bounced off the damaged walls. Reaching the end of the corridor, I found the area where the emergency stairwell should be located. Instead of an exit, I discovered a solid wall covered in the same layered graffiti as the rest of the building. At some point during renovations or budget cuts, the school district had sealed this stairwell permanently. My alternative escape route didn't exist. The principal's office door stood slightly open just a few feet away. I had no other options. The main stairwell was blocked by the approaching figure. The emergency exit was sealed, and the windows on this floor were too high above ground level for a safe jump. I needed to hide until the person passed by, then make my way back to the main stairs when the coast was clear. I slipped through the narrow opening into the principal's office, pulling the door almost closed behind me while leaving enough gap to watch the hallway. The space was larger than the classrooms, with tall windows that would have shown the playground when the building was working. Now they were cracked and partially boarded, allowing only scattered beams of afternoon light inside. The smell hit me immediately, thick, sweet, and nauseating in a way that made my stomach lurch. I'd dealt with plenty of bad smells during urban exploration, from mold and decay to human waste and chemical residue. But this was different. This was organic rot, the unmistakable stench of decomposing meat that seemed to coat the inside of my nostrils with each breath. I pulled my shirt collar up over my nose and mouth, trying to filter the air enough to function. The principal's desk was in the center of the room, its surface cleared except for a single cardboard box positioned directly in the middle. The box was open, its flaps folded back to reveal the contents inside. My flashlight beam found the box before my brain could process what I was seeing. Long, dark hair spilled over the cardboard edges, framing a woman's face that stared upward with glassy, unfocused eyes. The skin was pale gray, with dark veins visible beneath the surface, and the neck ended in a ragged, torn edge where it had been separated from the body. I stumbled backward, my rational mind struggling to accept what my eyes were showing me. This wasn't abandoned building decay or vagrant occupation. This was a severed human head, deliberately placed and recently enough that the smell of decomposition filled the entire room. The woman's features were recognizable in a way that made my chest tighten. The facial structure, the length and color of the hair, even the blank expression matched what I'd seen in Greg's video. This was the woman in the red dress, the figure who had watched him from the school's broken windows. But if this woman was dead, decapitated, and displayed like some twisted trophy, then who had Greg actually encountered? Who was wearing the red dress and making that noise in the hallway outside this office right now? My foot caught the leg of an overturned chair as I tried to back away from the desk. The metal scraped loudly against the linoleum floor, creating a harsh, scraping sound that carried through the office and out into the hallway beyond. The noise stopped immediately. Rapid footsteps replaced the previous measured pace, moving directly toward the office door with purpose and speed. I spun around, searching desperately for another exit. The windows were my only option, painted shut and partially boarded, but potentially breakable if I could find something heavy enough to smash through. I grabbed a metal stapler from the floor and rushed to the nearest window. The paint had created a seal so thick that the window frame wouldn't budge despite my pulling with both hands. I raised the stapler to strike the glass, but the footsteps had reached the doorway. The door swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. The figure standing in the entrance was tall and skinny, with stringy hair hanging around a face that twisted into an expression of pure joy at finding me cornered in the office. He wore the same red dress I'd seen in Greg's video, the fabric flowing around his bony body like a costume that belonged on someone else entirely. But it was what he held in his hands that made my legs go weak. Another severed head hung by its hair from his grip, fresh blood still dripping from the ragged neck wound onto his bare feet. The face was unfamiliar, but the terror frozen in the dead features suggested this person had seen exactly what was coming in their final moments. The man's smile widened impossibly, showing teeth that were stained dark with substances I didn't want to identify. When he spoke, his voice was high-pitched and sing-song, like a child announcing a game. Tommy's been such a bad boy, hiding from Mama. I grabbed the nearest filing cabinet and threw it at him with all my strength. The metal crashed into his legs, making him stumble backward just enough for me to squeeze past his reaching arms and run into the hallway. His voice exploded behind me, high-pitched and manic like a kid throwing a tantrum. "Tommy, come back! Mama needs to talk to Tommy!" The words bounced around the damaged walls as I ran toward the main stairwell, my flashlight beam jumping wildly across the floor covered in debris. I hit the stairs and took them 3 at a time, my boots hitting the concrete steps so hard that pain shot up through my knees. Above me, I could hear bare feet slapping against linoleum throughout the stairwell. He was following, moving faster than should be possible for someone wearing a dress and carrying a severed head. The first-floor hallway stretched ahead of me, and I ran harder than I had since high school track. My backpack hit my spine with each step. Behind me, his voice kept calling, the words becoming more twisted and frantic as I got further away. I could see the broken window where I'd entered, that rectangular opening that had seemed so handy an hour ago. Now it was the only thing between me and whatever that thing upstairs actually was. I dove through the opening without slowing down, feeling sharp glass edges tear through my jacket sleeves and cut into my hands as I scraped against the frame. Blood immediately covered my palms, but I didn't stop to check the damage. My feet hit the overgrown playground, and I stumbled through tall weeds and scattered playground equipment toward the fence line where my car waited on the street. Rusty swing sets and a broken slide got in my way, forcing me to dodge around them while trying to stay fast. My hands shook so badly that I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the car door. Blood from the glass cuts made everything slippery, and I wiped my palms on my jeans before finally getting the key into the lock. The engine started on the first try, and I'd never been more thankful for reliable car maintenance. As I put the car in drive, movement caught my attention in the rearview mirror. The figure in the red dress stood in the school's main entrance, exactly where Greg had seen the woman watching him leave. But this wasn't the same careful watching Greg had described. This thing was screaming words I couldn't understand, waving the severed head above his head like some kind of trophy while his voice carried across the empty playground. I pressed the gas and sped down the residential street, taking turns without any plan except getting away from that building. In my rearview mirror, the figure got smaller until the school itself disappeared behind a row of houses. Only then did I let myself check my hands, finding multiple shallow cuts across both palms that would need cleaning but weren't deep enough to need stitches. The drive home happened in a mental fog, where I followed familiar routes without thinking. My brain kept trying to process what I'd seen, going through explanations that made less sense each time. Homeless encampment, mental illness, drug-induced psychosis, someone playing an elaborate prank with movie-quality special effects. But the smell of rot in that office had been real. The filing cabinet I'd thrown had been real. The glass cuts on my hands were definitely real. And somewhere beneath all my logical explanations, a deeper part of my brain knew that I'd run into something that didn't fit into any category I'd previously believed possible. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone in my bloody hands. David was at work until evening, so I had hours to figure out how to explain this situation to someone in authority without sounding completely crazy. I called the Chicago Police Department's non-emergency line and waited through 4 minutes of hold music before reaching a desk officer who sounded bored by whatever call he'd handled before mine. "I need to report a possible crime scene at Woodlawn Elementary School on the south side," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and matter of fact. The officer asked for my name and contact information, then wanted details about what I'd discovered. I told him about the severed head in the principal's office, describing the condition and location as accurately as possible. When he asked how I'd gotten into the building, I explained that I'd noticed broken windows while driving past and had looked inside out of concern. I didn't mention Greg's video, my urban exploration hobby, or the man in the red dress. The discovery was enough information for the police to investigate. Everything else would only complicate my report and raise questions about my credibility. The officer took down my statement and said detectives would follow up if they needed more information. He thanked me for calling and ended with standard advice about staying away from the location while they processed the scene. After hanging up, I looked at my phone for a few minutes before opening my Instagram account. 5 years of photos, thousands of followers, and hundreds of pictures of every major abandoned building I'd explored in Chicago. My profile bio described me as a Chicago urban explorer and architectural photographer, with links to my other social media accounts. I deleted the entire account without downloading any of the content. Next, I pulled up the online marketplace where I'd bought most of my exploration equipment over the years. My LED flashlights, backup batteries, first aid supplies, cameras, safety gear, and even my solid exploration backpack. Everything went up for sale at prices low enough to ensure quick buyers. The process took 2 hours, and by evening, I'd sold nearly $1,000 worth of equipment to people who messaged me with pickup arrangements for the following week. David came home while I was boxing up the gear for buyers, and he stopped in the doorway of my bedroom looking confused. "What happened to your hands?" he asked, noticing the bandages I'd applied to the glass cuts. "Accident while working on something," I said, sealing another box with packing tape. I'm getting out of the exploration thing." He didn't push for details, probably relieved that I was giving up a hobby that had always worried him. Instead, he helped me carry boxes to the living room and asked if I wanted to order pizza for dinner. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that happened at Woodlawn Elementary, the organized living spaces, the careful arrangements of personal belongings, the severed head in the cardboard box, and finally the man in the red dress who had chased me through the building while carrying another head, like a child's toy. For 5 years, I'd treated urban exploration like a research project. I took pictures of rundown buildings to show how economic changes affected communities. I always rolled my eyes at people who claimed to see ghosts or monsters. I thought they just wanted attention and YouTube views. But I was wrong about what might be hiding in abandoned places. Some buildings weren't just empty. Things lived there, things that stayed where normal people wouldn't look. The excitement that kept me exploring for 5 years was completely gone now. I finally understood that some abandoned places had dangers way worse than falling through floors or getting caught by security.